Hello, everybody. Tonight we're talking about, or I'm talking about, and you're being forced to listen to me. We're talking about the history of Epworth, which is the community where we are today. Epworth has had more than one name. Initially, before it had a post office, it was kind of called Campground, which has to do with the people that came and talked to you about the spring and the campground area. In 1897, a post office was established, and I don't know for sure how to pronounce it, Atalla, Atla, guessing. It was called Atla for a while, and then in 1901 it was incorporated as Epworth. So if you want to confuse someone when they ask you where you live, just say Atla. It was incorporated actually as an official town in 1901. So there actually was a mayor. I don't know who mayor that was, but there was an official town. But in 1906, 5 years later, there was another election, and in this election they decided to dissolve the town. And I don't know why. If any of you know, let me know, because I got to thinking about it, and why did they do that? There were four things that kind of seemed consistent about this community, four aspects of it as I was making notes, because there's spellings and dates that are too hard to remember. And that was family is important, faith, learning, and fun. So with that in mind, the first people to live here were Cherokee, and the town, the name, and this is before the Cherokee removal, is, and I'm guessing, Yultsi Walla Yunash. And that was the name of the area that the Cherokee gave the area. There was a village. The village would be, if you go down Majola Road past the post office, you get to Fighting Town Creek. Somewhere in that area there was a village. The village was accounted for just before the removal. There was a guy by the name of Henderson, and he rode around on his horse, and he counted everybody up. Okay, there were 14 families for a total of 96 people. So there were families here, Cherokee families living here. In 1836, there was a removal, but interestingly, there's a lady who has a diary, Laura Waters, and she tells what happened to her. And she said that some of the Cherokees, just like in North Carolina, fled. They hid out, in this area. And then after the removal in the 1840s, they would make baskets and they would sell them at Pierce's Mill. They would exchange moccasins and deer hides for clothing. Now, what happens to them? That's the only account I can find of them for a while, and so they may have married into the community. So we start out with Cherokees. Now we have a baseball field here, and these guys over here love to tell sports stories. And you know what Cherokee baseball was like? It wasn't baseball; it was more like lacrosse, and it was pretty vicious and a lot of injuries, and it looked more like lacrosse. But there was a ball field where the ball field is today, so people have been playing ball there for a long, long time. Laura Waters also has an account of the Green Corn Festival, which be the end of the harvest season, our equivalent to Thanksgiving. And her account was that white men is what she says. I don't know about the women. She says white men were sometimes invited to it. And what they did, her husband, Joseph Waters, went to it. They started out with prayers. They then did a dance, and the dance he describes involves a soup-like thing that all the dancers would come and eat the soup, which probably had a lot of different vegetables that would have been just harvested, and then they would be dancing. And then after the prayers, after the dancing, there would be the ball game. Now, you have to play somebody else. There were two other villages in Fannin County. One is out the end of Aska, so they could have played them. The other one is where Hot House Church is, on the east side of the county, and they could have played that one or maybe even both. So there would have been ball games there. The next nearest ball field is up at Lake Conasauga, near the campground. There was a ball field up there. The Cohutta Wilderness, or what it is today is called the Cohutta Wilderness, was not a place that there were villages. That was a hunting area. Then you have to go down to Ellijay to find villages south of what today is the Cohutta. You have to go over to the other side to what today would be Chatsworth. But that was a hunting area. And the word Cohutta means a roof being held up by pillars or sticks, a shed roof. And I think that's beautiful imagery, because what it's really talking about is the mountains being so tall they held up the sky. And you've seen it, where the clouds are coming and touching the tops of the mountains, and so that was where that name came from. We talked a little bit about, like you've heard before, about the camp meetings and the spring that moved. And the camp meetings, they were held from prior to the Civil War to 1900. They would build a bush arbor, a temporary arbor. They would come in wagons. They would be there for 2 to 3 weeks. They would have the milk cow with them. They would have all the kids with them. They would do it in August. Okay, here's their schedule. At 8 a.m. Now, sometimes we complain about our preachers talking too long. Okay, this is like for 2 to 3 weeks. 8 a.m. A trumpet blast would wake you up. Well, probably a little before 8 a.m. so that you could make it to the 8 a.m. service. Then there was the 11 a.m. service. Then a 3 p.m. service and a night service. So you would go to 4 services in one day. And you would do that every day for 2 weeks. Anyhow, so we got to stop complaining. We just got to do that. Faith. This was very much a Methodist community for a long time. The first church, the first congregation is the Methodist Congregation. The congregation is 1865, and their building is 1895. Now, they just recently got an honor from the Methodist Church, and they have a really nice plaque out there as an extremely historic church. What you're talking about is what's inside the church, that was built on and expanded. And, of course, it would include the fellowship hall to the side. But within that church, the core of that church, is the oldest frame church building in the county. And they recently were recognized for that. The cemetery over here is their cemetery, and it dates to 1876. Now, that isn't something, unless we've got somebody in a cemetery, we don't normally visit it. But when I was doing the book Blue Ridge, I visited it. Now, I'd probably driven past it 30 years, something like that, 35 years. But it's a wonderful cemetery, if cemeteries can be called wonderful. It's got lots, it has a Civil War soldier in there, and I want you to wander around it, so I won't tell you where. You have to find the Civil War soldier. But there are lots of graves with symbols. Like they'll have like a branch with, a trunk of a tree with the branches cut off, which would indicate somebody who's young, who died much too young. Of course, most of you would recognize the little lambs. But it's full of Masonic symbols, all kinds of symbols. And it's just kind of a fun cemetery, to walk through. And I never would have walked through it if I wasn't writing a book. So I suggest a visit to the cemetery. First Baptist congregation is 1909, and the current building, which has been added on to a lot, is 1947. The first building they built was the right size, which is very small for the fact that there were like 7 people, but it had a problem. The door was too small for a standard casket. So until the church was, the brick church came along, all of the funerals were at the Methodist church. And I thought it was really nice of the Methodists to take care of the dead Baptists. And it was very generous of them to do that. And so for a long time, all of the funerals were over there, even though they might be a Baptist funeral or a Methodist funeral. And I never thought of a door being too small for a casket. But apparently that was the issue. We have schools here. And the beginning of schools, again, is Methodism. It was the Methodists who started schools. There was a one-room school on Medola Road. There's very little known of it. It's about where the post office is. And that one-room school did charge tuition. Atla High School and Cemetery starts in 1898 and lasts till 1904. It is a private school. It charges tuition. It is started by the Methodists, as was the original one-room school. In 1904, it had 12 high school students and 167 students from first grade through what we would call today middle school. When it was closed, it was converted into a new location for the Methodist Congregation. So that high school and seminary, and also elementary grades, was actually where the Methodist Church is now. So the first school is where the post office is now. The second school is where the Methodist Church is now. And then Epworth Seminary is from 1904 to 1936. Again, that's a Methodist institution, and it's right where you are now. It was on this hill. And there are a lot of old photographs of it. But it had 6 buildings. It had 2 classroom buildings. It had 2 dormitories. Some students boarded, some didn't. One of the dorms was the women and the faculty. The other dorm was the men's dorm. There was a gym. There was a president's house. And there were 2 classroom buildings, one for the high school kids and one for up to, at one time, 8th grade went with high school, so probably up to 7th grade. And that was a tuition school. Reverend R.H. Robb was the president. He came here from Northern Ireland, so he was an Ulster Scots. Many of the original settlers here would have been Ulster Scots. And so that was the next school. And public schools don't start here with the Fannin County Board of Education until 1839. So it then became a public school, and that lasted until 1992. How many people here went to school at Epworth? Okay, how many people had children that went to school here? It was a good place for kids to go to school. It really was. It was a very good school. Over the years, buildings were added and it changed, but it was a good school. My kids liked going here. They enjoyed it here. In 1992, the schools consolidate. This is closed. McKaysville is closed. I'm so glad that this one's still in any kind of decent shape. If any of you are on Facebook and seen the pictures of what it's like inside McKaysville School, it's really just probably unsafe. It's just really bad. So we still have a functioning building. Truett McConnell College was here from 1992 to 2008. And then for a few years after that, Toccoa Bible College was here. For a little while, classes from Reinhardt and Piedmont were held. At this point, there are no college classes here. At one time, there was the GED classes. Tell me what their name is, Carol. What was it called?
The Action Group.
Yeah.
And it was through Appalachian Tech.
Right. So that was here for a while. And Appalachian Tech had a few classes. I remember a nursing class when I was teaching over here. There was a Soul series. They took a whole group through a year's worth of nursing. Today, it's still used. There's an exercise class. There's music classes. There are, the auditorium's still used. This building's still used. I wish more of it was used, but there are problems with the wiring. They're just, when it's been looked at to be used again as a school, by colleges, it has wiring issues that make setting up the technology you have to have today difficult. The library even looked at it one time, and they had problems that would disqualify it. So I have hope that it will find new uses. But when you compare it to McKaysville, it's much, much better. The last of the 4 aspects of it is fun. This is a place where people enjoy life. They have good family life. They have good churches. 4th of July, as you know, those of you who are in charge of 4th of July, is a fun event. And I thought you guys did a real good job this year, given that it rained, because years ago, if it rained, it got canceled, and then you had to have it again on another date, and one year it was on Labor Day. 4th of July was on Labor Day, because it had to be rescheduled because it rained on 4th of July. And we had this rainy August, and it rained all through August, and they finally had it Labor Day. There's a new stage down in the middle of the park, which is great fun. It's just really a neat little stage. The Scouts are going strong out behind there. So it's a place where people care about each other, I think, and look after each other. But that is a short history. There are some older houses in here. There's some pretty old houses around. I think the Abernathy house out on the highway is one of the oldest in Epworth. The Vestal house here. And of course, that store, which is now abandoned, has quite a history that goes back a long, long way. And Joe Vestal was an interesting man who at one time sued the copper company. And he sued them over pollution. And he took that case through the courts. And you can, at home I have, the proceedings from court, bound proceedings from court. So he was quite a strong figure, strong character. Any questions about Epworth?
There was a swimming pool here, and for a long time that was the only place to swim. Later there was Lake Lamar, and then there was a scat pool at Isabel.
And wasn't it spring-fed and the water was really cold?
Yeah, from the...
Now, it was located...
Where's Kenny?
Where that house is across from the First Baptist Church.
Oh, that house. Okay. Yeah, what used to be his house. Yeah, that's where it was. Okay. Speaking of fun, have you ever seen those kids slide down the hill across the road from it at First Baptist? They do a thing every year where they take that hill in front of the church and they cover it with plastic and they dig this giant pool down at the bottom, and those kids are... Anyhow, you can go pretty fast going down that one. So they're still playing in the water. What happened to the pool?
They, from what I understand, it was cool, clean water, but it was spring-fed in the state. They had to put chlorine and a lot of stuff like this in it. And Clyde Weeks was just, I guess he wanted to go to a lot of trouble, do a lot of work to it. And I guess they just closed it up, but for a long time, there was two pools. There was a kiddie pool, and then there was another one, a larger, and at the front of the pool, there was diving boards. It was pretty nice.
Neat.
There was a jail here at one time too.
I didn't know that.
Yes.
Was it for, who operated it, the county or the town? Or?
Yes, the police operated.
I mean, but the sheriff's department or for 5 years there was a city.
Yes, that's when I think the jail
I think it
was
was
when it's incorporated.
During the time it was incorporated? Yeah. So did it have a policeman during those 5 years?
Well, I think the jail was even there after that. Because I knew the guy that blew the thing up.
Okay, explain blew the thing up.
He blew it up with dynamite. He dynamited it and blew it up.
But he legally did it.
Illegally, yes.
Legally or illegally?
Illegally.
Illegally.
They kept incarcerating him there. And so he was like, would you say, Otis on Mayberry? and he was always getting put in jail. And so the story is that one evening, he pretended to be sick. And so he was home in bed, and his mother knew he was in bed. So after she had went to bed, I guess, he slipped out of the house and went and blew the jail up and came back and was in bed before they got there to find out. And she said, no, he's back there in the bed. And so they go back and here he is in the bed.
So they never rebuilt it after that. Well, he solved his problem. He got rid of the jail.
What year?
It worked.
I don't know what year that was.
But right after that, he was out in Texas, had run out of money, and he held some revivals and become a prominent preacher, and made enough money to get back.
Yeah, not on the sermons, didn't they?
When he came back to here, he continued preaching.
Yes, oh, he's a good preacher. Do some research, I guess.
Oh, I have to find out more about this story.
I'll find out.
Now, according to Bob Barkley, Senior's book, Duck Town and back in Ransomine, there was a vessel that was mentioned as one of 4 families that moved in here first. This was back when the company was getting started in 1843. And there was, and I don't know if it was when the store was built here then or not, but the one time there were 3 canneries in the county. One here, one in Blue Ridge, and one in Morganton.
There was 3 what?
Canneries.
Oh, yeah, there was. Yeah, canneries. There was. That's right. There was a cannery here.
Mel Fisher ran this one.
Okay, Mel Fisher ran it. Okay, yeah, there was 3 canneries, and then they consolidated into one in Blue Ridge.
Mel was also the custodian here at school.
Now, the story what I remember about this school is there was a controversy over paddling, and there was helicopters here from 2 or 3 different TV stations, and they were just roaming all over the campus taking pictures of kids because there was a parent who caused a fuss about paddling, and my kids came home and thought they were going to be on television. Our kids came home and said, we're going to be on television. And we had to explain to them editing and the odds that they would be on television. But that was one of the most exciting days. And then there was the locust, what are they? Siticas. And there was a really, really bad infestation when Rebecca was maybe a 3rd grader. And the kids' occupation during recess through that whole thing was squashing them. They'd get 2 rocks, and they'd hit them in the middle with the rocks and squash those bugs. And they thought it was wonderful. They just thought that was the greatest thing there ever was, until she hurt her finger. And her daddy had to come get her, and she wasn't crying until she saw him, and then she boo-hooed. So apparently, it kind of got there rough there with squashing Siticas. Any other interesting stories about Epworth?
The spring.
Mm-hmm. They've had somebody here to talk about the spring, isn't that right? Yeah. And the spring was part of the camp meeting story. I mean, what I told you about how many times they had church, that's part of that story, because the issue was that someone wasn't going to let them use the spring, and so the spring miraculously moves. But it was during the camp meeting time.
I had an uncle and an aunt who graduated from Epworth Seminary here. He went on to become a principal, and she became a school teacher and retired from teaching.
Oh, neat. It'd be interesting to trace all the people that went to school at Epworth from the seminary on and what they did with their lives.
I'm sure they boarded because their parents lived in LHA.
Well, there was 2 dorms, so they could easily have boarded. And they would have paid tuition, because it was not a public school, which is not easy in that era.
Yes.
Incidentally, the Methodists are celebrating their 150th anniversary this weekend.
And that's of the congregation. That congregation's 150 years old. Well, it's called Epworth, and Epworth has a history in Methodism. I just went recently with a church group, Denise Bryson, Caldwell's church. We went to Epworth by the Sea, which is on St. Simon's Island, and it's run by the Methodist Church. It's a retreat center. So there's a lot of Methodist history here. There's more Baptists now, though, I want you to know. We outnumber the Methodists. But it's a good place to live. Okie doke.